Hey there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Earth Station One podcast. This is an episode you're going to enjoy. If you don't, you'll be sleeping with the fish. I can guarantee that. Or, maybe a set of cement shoes. You never know. But all you can say is forget about it. It's going to be a ton of fun to talk about our favorite gangsters and mobsters. It's, an interesting topic. It's been a long time since we've just picked like a subject matter to talk about. It's been for months now. It feels like it's been review after review after review. So I think this is going to be kind of fun. And we got a great crew to talk all about it. Of course, Mr. Mike Gordon is here.
Howdy.
And, you're not going to do your Italian accent or your.
No, that could get me into serious trouble. And so I'm just going to stay away from any sort of, anything that could be construed as sort of some sort of stereotype or whatever. So these are dangerous people we're talking about here. I have to treat it pretty seriously.
Oh, very much so. And we're also joined, it's been a long time actually since he's been on the show. Welcome back, Nick Fraser.
Thank you very much. And I will also not indulge in anything stereotypical, especially not to offend our fourth guest.
Yes, exactly. This woman was like chomping at the bit. She said, Faber, I better be on the show if you know what's good for you. Let's welcome ToniAnn Marini. Welcome to the show.
Hey, as a self-proclaimed Italian grandmother, I will do lots of stereotypical things, like talk with my hands. They will be in the frame all the time. I grew up in New Jersey, so I will also have lots of fun New Jersey gangster things to talk about, but I'm happy to be here.
What exit?
Very funny. 10.
Okay. You too. That's where I grew up too.
Yep. Woodbridge,
Literally.
born and raised.
I was born and raised in Perth Amboy. So there you go.
Yep.
So awesome. So it's very cool to be able to talk all about this. And we definitely would love to hear from you guys at home. Feedback at Earth Station One is the best way to get in touch with us. And if you're watching us up on YouTube, please, as always, like and subscribe. The graphic will be up, everything. So, just like and subscribe. So I think this is going to be a great topic, and we're going to just have tons of fun with it. And you know what, Mr. Mike? Let's roll with it.
So much to talk about, so much history. According to what little research I did, the
research
movie, the American movie, The Black Hand in 1906 was thought to be the first earliest surviving gangster movie. There could have been others before that, but this is the only one that survived. And there was a few other gangster movies in the silent era. D.W. Griffith did Musketeers of Pig Alley. But it really became, and it's interesting because this year Warner Brothers is celebrating its 100th anniversary, and I don't know if there's any other movie studio that's associated with did more or less, maybe, or whatever, good or bad, for gangsters, for mobsters, than Warner Brothers did. You're talking about Little Caesar in 1931, Cagney, Robinson, White Heat, I think, is one of the ones that I think of. Little Caesar was Robinson, right? And White Heat was Cagney. And those two guys were pretty much like the main figures. George Raft, Humphrey Bogart. I mean, a lot of great actors came out of the movement. And this is a lot of it came about because of the Great Depression. Gangsters were heroes. I think that's one thing that came out of the Great Depression, is that these guys who were criminals were looked at as heroes because of the Great Depression, Prohibition, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really interesting to see how they're depicted on the screen, obviously in film and in TV later on. So we're a lot to cover here, But I want to start with you, ToniAnn. Do you remember like your earliest sort of experience with a gangster fictionalized on TV or movies?
Well, there were the sitcoms I watched with my parents. We watched a lot of like like the Nick at Night stuff when I was growing up. So there was like, the I Love Lucy and I Dream of Jeannie and all of the, and every once in a while there would be an Italian person portrayed, and they'd always be either some goofy stereotype or they'd be a mobster, in that sort of, slick back, kind of almost always like what I'd call a greasy adaptation. That's the only word I could use to describe it. But I always took those as, just how people always made fun of certain other groups, because I didn't really understand growing up that people are awful. But I would see other groups being poked fun of too. So it wasn't like I felt like Italian people were always being picked on. But then as I grew up, I realized there weren't a lot of Italian people portrayed in any other ways. This was the way, to quote my favorite Mandalorian. So I don't remember any specifics of the, but I remember also watching gangster movies that were definitely not age appropriate because they had a lot of Italian culture in them. I watched The Godfather way too early because it was something my dad wanted to watch. Sorry, Dad.
The Godfather was a
throwing
hugely
him under the
influential.
bus.
Yes.
Got it.
Starting with the book by Mario Puzo, and
Yes.
then of course the Coppola movies has done a lot. And yes, I think in addition to the mafia and that culture, also, I mean, huge ties to Italy. I don't think it's possible to watch that without getting hungry. There's food everywhere. Like you can actually smell it sometimes off the screen.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's one that I think is a pivotal one for all of us. I don't even know if that's one that I can't think of my earliest one, but that has to be accounted for in there. Nick, what about you? How far back as far as gangster movies you go?
Well, I'll just start off with correcting one little thing you have. What you're thinking of really is probably The Public Enemy,
Right.
rather than White Heat. White Heat was 10 years later for Cagney, but you'll notice how serious Warner Brothers takes it. They have their own wraparound for their gangster movies, Warner Brothers Gangsters. And yes, the big three, Public Enemy, Scarface.
Yes, good one. Thank you.
We're gonna talk about Scarface maybe later, where that led to, and Little Caesar have all been entered into the list of significant American films, all within from that just that 2-year time period. And yes, there were others. There was Angel with Dirty Faces. That's where Bogart shows up. I've got a pile here. Excuse me. Here we've got. Okay, we've got White
Wow.
Doing research, I see.
Yeah, these are just the ones I own. I guess I didn't take Angels with Dirty Faces. Oh, yes, I did. There's Angels with Dirty Faces right there. And yeah, that Bogart, like a lot of classic movie icons, started out as a gangster. The difference with Cagney and
Robinson.
Thank you, Edward G. Robinson, is that their identity in a lot of ways stayed with gangsters. But if you're asking me what's the first thing I remember, I was raised by a woman who essentially spent most of her time in New York. So while she didn't necessarily know the guys, she knew the guys who knew the guys, because she was a jazz singer. And so, she said, yeah, some guy might say to her, that guy over there, the Black Hand, don't mess with him. And so, yes, she loved Mario Puzo's Godfather. We did not go to the movies for that, but she loved the Godfather movies. She especially loved it when they recut it for TV in chronological sequence. For the first two movies, the so-called Godfather saga. So yeah, that certainly. That I'm old enough to remember when it was in the theaters, and it hit the culture like a huge meatball. There's your offensive stereotype for the evening.
No, it's only offensive if you go meet the ball. Then
Oh, no, I'm not going to do
then
that.
you can't do that.
We're not doing that. We're not,
But
not doing that.
that's my favorite phrase whenever you
Yeah.
have to say meatballs. So,
But the thing with The Godfather is that mobsters had been in movies from practically the very beginning. Michael makes good points about why the mob pictures in the late
30s. Mm-hmm.
Michael makes a very good point about why the mob pictures of the early 30s were so popular. Although, of course, they all have some sort of the same arc. Young guy comes up through the mob and, sacrifices his soul for success and comes to a bad end, thereby affirming crime doesn't pay. The curious thing is, most of these movies so annoyed upstanding moral Americans, the five of them that make it their business to do that sort of thing, that this led to the Hays Code of movie production. The gangster movies are pre-code movies.
Yeah.
And there are some unusual little things that happen in them that you don't get in later movies. The gangster does show up as a character throughout the rest of Hollywood's run. In my personal jam, film noir, the gangster is often a stock character, sometimes representing the rot at the heart of the American dream, because film noir is all about betrayal and corruption. But it's rare that it's a story about a gangster, not in the same way that Public Enemy or Little Caesar were.
Right.
Until you get to, oh my God, Mario Puzo made a lot of money with this book. We need to make it into a movie, and we need to make a gangster movie. And that really is when you get to The Godfather, you have a movie where the characters are the gangsters. They're the ones you're supposed to be sympathetic with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also when Coppola comes in and is like, no. This needs to be done by Italians. This also is a cute commentary on the long history of Jews playing Italians and Italians playing Jews. Because Paul Muni and Edward G. Robinson, not Italians, playing Italians in classic 30s gangster movies. Cagney was an Irish gangster. Cagney was an Irishman. The cultural scales were a little bit different at that point.
Yeah, well, that's a kind way of saying it. Yeah.
On the other hand, when you get into the 70s and 80s, you've got Robert De Niro playing a Jewish gangster in Once Upon a Time in America.
It's true.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, it's interesting too, because you also had, in the 60s still, you also had, of course, you had Warren Beatty in his famous gangster role, Bonnie and Clyde.
And that brings up an interesting question I wanted to, first of all, I'd like to start out with a benediction from the last season of the previous season of Fargo, which is sort of like a Coen Brothers amusement park.
Oh, yeah.
Jason Schwartzman is taunting some characters who are in jail. Says, you know why America loves a crime story? Because America is a crime story. And that's so very true if you think about it too much. When we're talking about gangster movies, are we just talking about criminals, or are we talking about organized crime?
All the above.
I was going to say, I mean, that whatever you guys want to bring to the table, because I think they all fall under that umbrella, right? They, you said. From Mike, what did you say? What your earliest one was, or
no? I haven't.
How far back you go? Go ahead.
No, for me, the earliest one, and everyone's going to laugh at this one, is a piece of the action from Star Trek.
I figured it might be, given what you used as a promo.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that was my first experience with gangsters. I was like 4 or 5 years old. I didn't know what a gangster was at that time. And it's interesting too, because, since then, growing up within a couple years of that point, we then had, remember seeing a movie, it was called Bugsy Malone. and it was a kids gangster movie where everyone got cream pied, and it was pretty awesome. Even though it was Scott Baio, but it's okay. It's a whole different story.
And
Jodie
Jodie Foster.
Yes. And it was interesting, but then then I just started. My grandfather, who was who introduced me to all the silent movies, and he started introducing me probably by the time I was 7 or 8 to you had the Edward G. Robinson, all the different film noir, but you also had some of the movies that Nick had mentioned. And because growing up where we grew up, PBS had all the black and whites on Saturday afternoons, and it was awesome to be able to watch it. And we used to sit around, most kids went out and played in the park. My grandfather and I sat in front of the TV watching old silent movies or classic movies and stuff like that. And he even took me to film houses to watch Charlie Chaplin and stuff like that, or Buster Keaton. But then we started watching it, and my mom got so pissed when he took me to go see Bonnie and Clyde, because they re-released it, and I wasn't even 10 yet. And and it's like, oh, you want to see Willy Wonka in another movie? It's like, so
I've forgotten he's in that movie.
Yep.
It's his debut, I believe.
Yeah, it was his first movie. And it's interesting. And then of course, as I got older, watching all the different, iterations through the 40s and into the 60s, and then of course Godfather, and falling in love with it. And it's interesting from the Godfather on, then you had different takes on organized crime and the mob, and it was always, the gangster was always something different. Because I remember watching The Sting, and that was a mob film, and it was pretty awesome to seeing that. But the mob in that one were the patsies, so it was just interesting.
Yeah. So if for a piece of the action, if you would like to see the guy who played Bella Oxmix, Anthony Caruso, in a really great film noir, have you ever seen The Asphalt Jungle?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He actually plays a safecracker in that. And that was the great thing at Paramount at that time. They had access, when they were doing Star Trek, to old contract players who they weren't making these kind of movies anymore. And The Asphalt Jungle is a great heist film, is what it is.
Yeah.
And it's an early role for one young Marilyn Monroe as well.
Wow. That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Anthony Caruso, Sterling Hayden, the ill-fated police captain of The Godfather, is the big bruiser. Sam Jaffe, who was in a million things, is the mastermind. And Stuart Whitmore, I believe, I'm maybe getting his name wrong, the guy who was the Birdman in Shawshank Redemption, is an irascible hunchback bartender who's important to this whole plot as well. And it's all directed by John Huston,
which is even better.
So
yeah.
Excellent.
It is a classic. I have no, I can't recall that far back as far as my first experience with fictional or even real. Of course, the small town I was in, Winchendon, there was none of that sort of thing. So, at least not that we knew of. So I'd seen, gangsters portrayed and as Mike said, in Star Trek, or in other, sometimes in comedies, in sketch comedies, sometimes otherwise. But for me, the first time I really kind of got, when I think of, when you say gangster to me or mobster, the first name that pops into my head, because I'm such a huge Batman fan, is Carmine Falcone.
Yes.
And his introduction in Batman Year One by Frank Miller, And he's been portrayed many times. He's really well portrayed, I think, in Batman the Animated Series. And Batman has all these colorful foes. His rogues gallery is one of the best in all of fiction. But Falcone stands out because he feels like, when he's done well, he feels like he's the most real. At least in my, and he brings Batman to a level where it doesn't seem ridiculous. And it's one of the things I appreciated about the most recent Batman movie, where he was in. So for me,
which recent one do we mean?
The most recent Batman movie.
The Batman.
The Batman.
The
Okay.
one,
I thought you might mean that, but I just wanted to.
John Favreau was it John Turturro?
No, it was
Turturro.
Yes, with Pattinson as the Pattinson, as we
Pattinson
right.
Batman.
Yeah. I mean, he's been played by a lot of people, but yeah, and he was most recently played by John Turturro.
Yeah.
So for me, that's what stands out. I'm curious, ToniAnn, is there a specific character that comes to mind when you hear the word gangster? Like, is there somebody that just blows everybody else away as far as like you pick in your head, you picture?
So I've always been fond of Johnny Dangerously. I quote that movie all the time.
Nice.
And I know it's supposed to be a
segue from a Batman to a Keaton.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I do what I can. But it's just, I think of the absurdity of it and how it had everything you wanted in a gangster movie. It had the woman, and it had the dancing, and it had the very quotable things, and it wasn't too violent, and so it made it kind of more acceptable that it was a movie, as opposed to the more real ones, like Casino or Goodfellas or things like that, where you have these really, like, I mean, that's what it's like in real life, and probably even worse, especially when some of those movies were based on true stories and things like that. But for me, it's just kind of that, when I think of a Hollywood, like a mobster movie or a gangster movie, I'm putting those two words together, not just a gangster, right? I want to think of like the ridiculous, because that's what I use. I like to watch movies for the escapism sometimes and things like that. As Nick said earlier, I know a guy who knows a guy, and I have family members who are very much like some of the characters in the really, gruesome movies sometimes. And so but when Mike posted about, we're doing Geek, I was like, I got to talk about Johnny Dangerously, and I got to talk about, I was like thinking of all these things. But then I also saw earlier, you had asked, or somebody had said about, like, are we talking about organized crime, or, what are we? And that got me thinking about, sometimes there are mobsters and gangsters in movies, but I wouldn't call it a mobster or gangster movie. Like Boondock Saints, I consider that like a hero or anti-hero, kind of movie, because they're the focus. But there's a lot of mob stuff going on. Like, that's the beef of the.
Oh yeah.
But if I'm like, I'm in the mood to watch a mobster movie, I'm not going to sit down and watch that. So it got me thinking about, how I really define those things. That's
what I mean by through most of the run of film noir, gangsters are stock characters. They're not necessarily the focus. There's a great turn that Robinson does at the beginning of the film noir period in a little film called Key Largo, in which he is the menace. And he is in no way someone you want to empathize with. He's an awful person, and his cronies keep trying to tell him, we're coming back. We're going to get Prohibition back. Because, of course, that was the big thing with the National Syndicate. We want that back. The focus of the film is Bogart and Bacall. going across the pond to some of my favorite gangster flavored movies are the stuff of Guy Ritchie.
Oh God, yes.
And Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels,
Yes.
and Snatch, they both feature mobsters, but in the immortal words that Jason Statham has, the pikey had visions of running that truck over. He takes care of the mobsters. Now, The Gentleman, it really is centered on a mobster, his most recent film. But weirdly enough, it's Matthew McConaughey in England, being a Yank. Mobsters come up as characters because they represent the the viewer's secret and not so secret wish to be able to do anything they wish to do. Of course, as Scorsese will tell you, that comes at a price.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick, is there someone in particular, a character that you think of automatically, the first thing that comes to your mind, the first one that comes to your mind?
I am so saturated by American culture, I cannot help but think of a movie that begins, "I believe in America." You got to think of Don Corleone as the first. And of course, the problem with The Godfather is people are not listening to what The Godfather is saying, and everything, the wheels come off everything. Until Michael puts it all back together again. Yeah, definitely that. But I think it's telling that one of the things Mike mentions is his first impression is the stereotypical depiction of them, very, very intentionally stereotypical depiction of them in A Piece of the Action. Because that is how much saturated the George Raff, Paul Muni, Edward G. Robinson, James Cagney gangsters were part of our culture.
Well, you even had Shatner trying to do Cagney in that episode.
Yes, indeed, because that's people go. That's how much it's soaked into the culture. In the middle of Malcolm X, and let's face it, whenever Spike Lee does a movie, he tries to do 3 movies at once. Part of it is kind of a gangster picture with young Malcolm Little, but there's him and Shorty, played by Spike Lee himself with Denzel Washington, are playing in the park, and Spike Lee's going, "I'm tired of being the cops. I want to be Bogart," and Malcolm Little goes, "Well, Shorty, you can't be Bogart. You're not tall enough." And then he goes, "Well, not too short to be Cagney." Bang, bang, bang. So yeah, I mean that's how deeply ingrained that sort of depiction was to Americans.
Well, it still is. In all places, Zootopia had a gangster muskrat, or I don't remember. If you haven't watched Zootopia, you should.
Mr. Big.
Yes, Mr. Big, and he was this little tiny,
tiny,
Godfather-esque thing, supported by polar bears who were scared of him. And I mean, but it's in this kids movie, and they throw in those depictions sort of everywhere because it's so pervasive.
Oh, very much so. And it's interesting too, because you also then had Martin Scorsese take it to the gangster to a whole different level in a lot of his films. And, when I think of that, I start getting right to Goodfellas. Or,
I think you can see the through line from Coppola to Scorsese.
Oh,
it's
very much so.
It's right there, right?
It's a through line, but there's a difference in it.
Sure.
An important difference. The Godfather is a myth to the extent they make fun of that in The Sopranos. It is very mythic. If I have any complaint about the Godfather movies, it's how drippingly romantic it gets every time you're in Italy. It's very much myth. The Scorsese movies is that great trilogy of narrated films based on real life: Goodfellas, Casino, and The Irishman, in which you're getting people telling stories to gangsters telling stories to each other. This is what it's like, So it's still kind of legend making. And then if you want to get cold reality, Donnie Brasco. It's a wonderful image of Al Pacino, Michael Corleone himself, hammering a parking meter because he needs to pay up. That he's taken because he's busting out parking meters to get change because he's got to earn. But no, Scorsese is great in that, you know, he knew people in that life. The thing with Coppola is Coppola likes making great, big, epic movies. I mean, he didn't move on. He didn't move on from Godfather 2 to do Goodfellas. He moved on to that to do Apocalypse Now.
Right.
And then broke the bank doing a Tom Waits musical, but that's another story.
Mike, is there somebody you think of automatically?
It depends. You know, there's so many different gangsters that come to mind as soon as I think, you know, for recent memory, of course, it's Tony Soprano. And, you know, being from New Jersey, it's like he's the stereotype of a typical New Jersey person anyway. And then to throw in the gangster aspect of it and the families, and it showed, you know, to me, again, it was almost like a love affair for the, you know, the gangsters, and compared to what real life would have been in a lot of ways. They tried going for some real life, you know, there was no character that was safe on it, or there was no, you know, but it was interesting to see. But, you know, of course, you know, Robert De Niro, for me, anytime I think of a gangster is, you know, I think of De Niro, just because all the different roles he's played.
To the point where he could bankroll that into making comedies like
Sure.
Analyze This.
Yeah, very much so.
Yep. Absolutely.
I don't hear no so often, except for when the people are saying no, 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 no.
You know, talking about why, you know, we have this love affair, or why they're so popular, gangster movies and gangster stories. I think it also has to be pointed out, in addition to the, you know, the freedom of the characters that we like to identify with or whatever, is that a lot of times they are played by amazing actors, actresses, and going over the top, creating cinematic moments. And that is so attractive, whether it's Robert De Niro, whether it's Johnny Depp, whether it's Harvey Keitel, whether it's oh, come on, help
Denzel.
Denzel Washington.
Denzel, thank you.
Washington.
Yes, Denzel Washington.
I'm glad you mentioned that. What were you thinking of, ToniAnn?
Well, so I was thinking either between American Gangster or Training Day. And Training Day, I have because he's supposed to be a cop, but he's really not the great cop, and he's doing all this stuff. And
Training Day is a film I really do not like, for a variety of reasons that have little to do with Denzel Washington. But I do agree with you. I think he's much more interesting when he's morally ambiguous rather than. But American Gangster, oh my God! If you haven't seen that, go out and see it. It's Ridley the General Scott at some of his best American set filmmaking. It's a divided story between him on one end and Russell Crowe as the man chasing him on the other. And Denzel Washington deserved an Oscar for that much more than he deserved an Oscar for Training Day, even though we all know he got it for Malcolm X. But no, American Gangster is a great gangster story. And it's beautifully filmed. It's got an incredible cast. I'm amazed more people don't talk about it more than they do.
Well, it's a long movie, just like Gangs of New York and Casino, The Irishman. You know, they all become these long, but they're worth it. I mean, you just get sucked into the story. I will watch Casino purely for the line when he's in the kitchen and he's like, all the blueberry muffins have to have the same number of blueberries, like something just ridiculous that some mobster who's, you know, gets sent to Las Vegas is now all of a sudden concerned with blueberries. Just tickles me. It's ridiculous that is a line in a mobster movie.
No, agreed.
That's Casino is a great movie to watch for how to run a casino, or how a mob would run a casino. while it's also based in real life, the whole love story thing is a little wearing. Love story in scare quotes.
Yeah, the whole thing with Sharon Stone.
Yeah. But no, that also is quite good too. The other thing with American Gangster is it's very good at talking about the ethnic cleavages in American crime. And the fact the FBI didn't quite seem to understand that a black man could do what he did.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to talk about ethnic cleavages in American crime, and to Tony Ann's defense, it wasn't just all the Italians.
Nope.
Right.
There was a long history of the Irish mob and the Jewish mob.
I was about to say the Jewish,
and the two
Lansky,
the Meyer Lansky, the two that come to mind automatically for me, even though again no Jews were used in the making of this movie, is Once Upon a Time in America, and for the Irish, I think it's the Coen brothers' second movie, Miller's Crossing.
Miller's Crossing is
which
amazing.
Is all about the Irish mob in America. So to give fair time, criminality knows no real ethnic background in this country. America is a crime story.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like after or during and after the Cold War, you see a lot more Russian mobs stories starting to pop up, or people starting to use like Eastern European descent mob, right? People as the bad guys. And so there was sort of this steering away from some of the maybe ethnic groups that people were using a lot from the 30s.
Well, that's because Hollywood, knows its own, and there was a huge explosion of Russian mob activity in Los Angeles with lots of careless use of large firearms. So that had something to do with it, along with what happened in New York. Just as an aside, you mentioned the Batman before. Prior to that, with The Dark Knight has a wonderful vignette of ethnically diverse mobsters. And that of course the irony is it's the Joker who destroys them, not Batman, because the Joker is a free agent of chaos. But no, I do love the mobsters. They have that beginning sit down that the Joker crashes in Dark Knight. That's just wonderful.
With the different gangs and everything.
Yes, with the different gangs. Yeah,
and of course the agent of chaos would go after organized crime. I mean it stands to reason.
Another one that was really good that also represented, like ToniAnn was saying about the Eastern European, was a movie called Eastern Promises.
Oh yes. I'd forgotten about that. Thank you for mentioning it. That is one of two incredible films that Viggo Mortensen made with Cronenberg.
Yep.
The other one being History of Violence, which
History of Violence was so good.
Which also has an organized crime theme to it too, but especially Eastern Promises. As I recall, like the three main characters are played by a Norwegian, a French guy, and whatever the hell Viggo Mortensen is. But Viggo Mortensen, being Viggo Mortensen, he went and he sat down in a Russian cafe in London to see how well he'd mastered his Russianness. And people clammed up because they thought he was mobbed up.
That is awesome.
But no, that is an excellent film too.
And I want to make sure we get to this point because I think you were scratching on it a little bit earlier, Nick. But one actor that I was trying to think of was on the tip of my tongue was Al Pacino, and of course the difference between the 1930s Scarface
31
1980s Scarface is like. I mean, that's like night and day in a lot of ways, right?
I have enormous problems with the Brian De Palma, Oliver Stone Scarface. The genesis of this movie apparently was Pacino saw the original at a revival house. Hey, kiddies out there, once upon a time there were no VCRs and old movies had to be shown in theaters. And that's what Pacino had done. He'd gone into a revival house and seen Scarface and thought, this is really good. I'd like to be in that. And they
A
thought
lot of
about
our
doing-
audience though is asking what is a VCR. So hold on.
No,
Okay,
no. We
okay.
don't. No young person listens to our show.
So
that's-
so the deal here is that he thought maybe they do it as a revival piece. No. Let's do it up to date. And so they really misrepresented the Cubans. They greatly overemphasized the amount of criminality in the Marelitos, the boat lift people, and the accent he's doing, I don't know what the hell it is, but it's not a really Cuban accent. And so, yeah, ironically enough, the arc of the story is pretty much the same one as the Paul Muni movie. No Cubans were used in the making of that movie either. They're mostly, ironically enough, Italians, except for the guy playing his best buddy. So, yeah, in the Cuban community, that movie is not well loved.
Well, I've noticed that over time, that one has gotten it's not near as popular as it was in the 80s.
But it does definitely have a footprint.
Sure.
It has I have to admit that it has an enormous cultural footprint.
Say hello to my little friend is
Friend.
That is cinema history there. I mean,
First
that is
you
an
get
iconic moment.
First you get the money, then you get the power, then you get the women. Yeah. He's supposed to be repellent. He is repellent.
Mhm.
I think the best thing that came out of the movie was Michelle Pfeiffer.
Who then ended
but
up being married to the mob.
who ended up being married to the mob. But I think a much better Brian De Palma gangster movie where the gangsters are the villains is The Untouchables.
Yes.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah.
Now,
I mean,
that's
it's pretty cartoony. I mean, obviously,
that's
De Niro's
pretty
Capone is like really over the top, but it works for that movie.
it's high gloss mismaking. Hey, whenever Giorgio Armani does your costumes, we're not talking reality here.
No. But it's interesting though, because you both had the TV show with, Robert Stack also with The Untouchables.
Yeah.
And then you had the movie, and most of people our age are more familiar with the movie. And
Sure.
it's interesting because you had the in The Untouchables on TV, the Robert Stack version, the mob was just there was no redeeming feature at all for them at all. There wasn't, they were just all scum.
Well, I would say there's no redeeming feature in The Untouchables. They just are dressed better
Exactly.
in the movie.
Well, if you're talking about suspending belief, I mean, Dick Tracy with all the different colors and all, I mean, I love it. It's one of, I'll watch it over and over because it's absolutely ridiculous, but that is not at all. I mean, that's not at all rooted in reality.
If I were dropping things in bit buckets, I would put Dick Tracy in the same bit bucket as Piece of the Action and Bugsy Malone of the American popular image of the gangster having been so popular that, let me rephrase that sentence. That sounds terrible. The popular image of the gangster was so effectively siphoned into the American psyche that they go, oh yeah, let's take that image and play with it. And that starts off with the Dick Tracy comics.
Sure.
Well. It's it's just the shorthand. All Beatty is doing is putting it up in living Technicolor and dialing it up to 11.
Oh yeah, but it's interesting because with we've talked about Warren Beatty earlier with Bonnie and Clyde, but he also played Bugsy Siegel in Bugsy, and that's all about the forming of Vegas. How the mob,
If you want a character, I'm going to do some deep cutting here for TV. It was a little series. I think it was on TNT. It was really good, but didn't get renewed. Something called Mob City. And Mob City was about Mickey Cohen and Bugsy Siegel. Bugsy Siegel is Ed Burns in L.A., and he's being chased by a special agent being played by John Bernthal.
Oh wow.
And you can't even get it on disc in this country. Right now, I have a special order coming to me from France because I found out about this. It's a German Blu-ray of all things.
From France.
From
Yeah.
France, yeah. But it's one of the most accurate depictions of Mickey Cohen that I can think of. Being an old Angelino, I'm up on my LA history. Under movies I don't much care for, but I will mention, that's definitely a gangster movie. It tried to be the Untouchables. I'm going through my pile here. Gangster Squad.
Yeah, I remember
Great
that.
Great cast, not a great movie. Especially Sean Penn's over-the-top version of Mickey Cohen. But Mob City is a much better film to watch about the criminality of Mickey Cohen and Bugsy Siegel. And you get a special guest appearance of Meyer Lansky, the man who was able to work the entire Italian syndicate and stay neutral above it all because he was a really good businessman. Oh, and speaking of good businessmen, another gangster feature that I think of that most people may come up with is The Wire.
Oh yeah.
Stringer Bell, Idris Elba's breakout character in that is he's a great businessman. He happens to be working in an illegal business.
Hate when that happens.
Yeah.
It just so happens.
Exactly.
One of the I don't know if I'd call it a trend yet, but I've seen like last year there was a couple of instances, fairly high profile, movie on HBO Max with the Bullet Train and Tokyo Vice of the Yakuza being brought into sort of prominence, let's say. I've seen like a few movies like Tokyo Drifter from the 60s and a couple of other ones, and I know that over like for Japanese movies it's a lot more of a thing, but I don't see them in American movies very often.
There's
outside of like Black Rain maybe, or
there's a wonderful odd 70s movie with an older Robert Mitchum simply called The Yakuza.
The Yakuza, yeah.
There's plenty of Japanese Yakuza movies. But Americans don't quite seem to know what to do with them. Unless you have the foreigner in a foreign land, getting involved with them going to Japan.
Right. In the US, they did, Rising Sun with Sean Connery and Wesley Snipes. And then you even had Kill Bill, where they
Kill Bill,
Crazy 88.
Yeah.
Kill Bill, that mix master of pop culture tropes.
Mm-hmm. But there was also a TV show in the late 80s. It was called Wise Guy. I don't know.
Yes, I remember. Ken Wall was the star of that, wasn't he?
Exactly. And that also, it was interesting because Wise Guy also starred Jonathan Banks, who also then went later on.
Now, okay.
Yep. And he went on, of course, to be in Breaking Bad. Right there, you had the Mexican drug lords.
Yes, and that really is the current phrase and trend of Narcos, especially in Mexican telenovelas, and on Netflix or the Narcos.
Narcos, but then and it's like it's interesting because you also had there was that one with the biker gangs dealing.
Sons of
Anarchy.
Yep. So you have that also.
And I think they did the Mayans. They had a spin-off with the Mayans
for the Hispanic gang and that.
And there was that one series recently with Queen of the South. Is that what that was called? Queen of the
Queen of the South. Okay. That has a very interesting heritage. That was based on a Mexican telenovela, the most Reina del Sur, starring the queen of the Mexican telenovelas. It was one of the most expensively produced Mexican telenovela because a lot of it was filmed in Spain. The story was created by one of the most successful novelists in Spain, Pérez Reverte, about this young Mexican woman who's the girlfriend of a guy who's transporting coke, and he gets screwed by his gang and shot, and she has to flee to Spain, where she becomes a narco queen. It's much more. She ends up being protected by this gloriously grouchy Russian mobster who's there in the south of. It takes place a lot in the Spanish colony on the shores of Algeria. And when they did it for TNT, it really it's more of a Narcos cross-border story here.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's one of the rare instances that we see female mobster lord, queen. To be candid, I can't even really think of too many others. Just a handful of others, maybe. I don't think that has been explored nearly enough.
Well, there have been episodes where like someone's daughter, right, was like using the mantle of the father or the uncle or the brother or something, but they were really the ones pulling the strings and just using, men as the because that's who other men respect or things like that. But you're right, there's definitely not a lot of that. And I think in the same vein, when we were talking about American Gangster earlier, where, no one expected the black man to be, the head of that's really a sort of another thing where there's probably very successful operations that might be run by women that they know how to keep out of trouble. And so that's why nobody's written a based on a true story movie about them, because nobody knows nothing. So
there was a film with Melissa McCarthy, and I want to say Tiffany Haddish, that was a third actress. I'm forgetting, that was based in Boston. No, it was based in Hell's Kitchen.
I know which one you're talking about.
Yes. Yes.
I can't remember the name of it now.
I'll leave for the technical wizards to come up with this and put it up on the site, but I do remember this.
Yes.
It's got a very commonplace title to it.
I think if I'm not mistaken, it was based on a comic.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I believe it was. And if I think of another comic, and it's got, I don't know that it has some atrocious title like Lady Gangster, but it's basically set in the 1920s with an Italian woman who ends up taking over. And the graphic is quite something. She's a full-bodied woman wearing a pinstripe suit, with a 20 Tommy gun.
It's just called The Kitchen.
The Kitchen, right, for Hell's Kitchen. That's right. I knew it was a very simple title.
Also, I'm going to put this out there, and I want to hear from you guys too, is what you think is like the new or current trend or hotness when it comes to gangster things in the media. But I'm going to put this out there. Likewise, like we think of Robert De Niro or James Cagney, I think in that ilk. I think right now, Tom Hardy is making himself like really much of a case for. I mean, he played both of the Krays. He played Capone. He was great as a Jewish mob boss and in Peaky Blinders, which is a great series as well about a sort of gangster family. I'm putting it out there. I think Tom Hardy is like the next like guy that is taking over like all of the gangster roles. Is there anybody or any other trend that you see now regarding gangster movies, gangster shows?
Well, for me, it's interesting because when you think of any gangster shows now, it's mostly dealing with the Mexican drug lords, a lot of them. And, you could think of like Ozark or something like that. And, where they were mostly behind the scenes in that one. But, it was interesting because, you had the American who weren't as well organized as the Mexicans and everything in that one. But you have a lot of different foreign, influences now for the mob. It's not focusing mostly on the gangsters and such like that.
Right. Well, Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul both use that sort of Mexican drug trade as well as a big thing. And then Gus Fring is probably like, the American counterpart.
But then there's Narcos, and there's also so many other series talking all about it. But like you
Yeah.
said, Penny Dreadful, you had, and it's interesting too, because for a lot of people, when they think of the American mobsters, more modern, it's Sopranos
Mhm.
and everything. And,
Well, a lot of this has to do with the fact that the Italian American stereotypical mafia has completely broken down and fallen apart. And the people involved in prosecuting will tell you this because the younger generation has no respect for the idea of keeping your mouth shut. Omerta. So that's over with. In fact, one thing I don't think anyone's mentioned so far, Boardwalk Empire, goes back even farther in terms of nostalgia. So it makes sense that the south of the border criminality is the one that seems to be cresting on the wave currently. That does not surprise me, and that's the only thing I can think of.
Well, and that's, you have people who want to blame what's going on in America on people who aren't Americans or who are outside influences. But then you also have things like they've done the American crime stories where they like focused on O.J. Simpson, and they focused on I forget what the second season. I think it was whoever killed Versace or something along those lines. But you have they're then trying to depict like these single people, right? Not an organized crime. Like, they were just a one-off. They were not all of these other people, right? So you have that real dichotomy, I think, when you're looking at what's come out in the last 20 years.
And I think true crime, whether it's documentary series or documentary movies or reenactments of true crime, is like the big thing now, which usually, as you point out, is more individual criminals or at the most families of criminals, criminal families, rather than what we think of as
large
gangsters.
Organized structure,
or more organized structure. And is that, do you guys, they see that as well now?
Well, very much so. And it's interesting because a show I know like you and I watched, Mike, was Person of Interest. And you had the mob at first, and it was very big involved, like with Elias and characters like that. But then, the government became the big government, spy agencies and everything, where started becoming the mobsters in that. And it was, then you had the difference, you had the different tech companies who are almost like becoming the mob now in some ways.
I think in some ways, perhaps you made me think that Americans aren't worried about the guys with the funny foreign names down the street who might be trying to rob them, and worried about much larger structures that they consider to be dangerous, that may have more of the imprimatur of law and respectability.
Exactly.
It's dealing with people in large fedoras almost seems quaint nowadays.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, like, is there a case to be made for the what we usually think of as gangster or mobster movies now, just being sort of a retro thing now, where when you see movies now, it's more like a romantic notion of them, rather than anything of substance?
Well, I think that in the movies like Goodfellas and Casino and even The Godfather, where they do have those sort of, romantic bits, whatever, at the time, you knew people who were like that, or maybe you knew people who were connected. I have like second and third cousins who I've never met because they've been away in Florida for 10 to 15 years or somewhere, right? Like that's like a thing. But that's not a recent thing. That's a 20, 30 years ago thing, where you knew people like that. Or maybe there were people in your neighborhood or in the city, in the bad part of town or something, right? That resonated with, and it wasn't like fiction. But now the world has changed a lot. And with technology, a lot of these organized groups maybe they went digital, or maybe they stopped messing with things that could get them caught, and they figured out other ways to do stuff. So now they're not as visible, and it seems more like, oh, that was a thing that happened in the 80s and 90s, or that was a thing that happened in the 20s and 30s, and that's not a thing that happens anymore. When it's organized crime is like still a thing, it just looks completely different than it did with a lot of these movies that we're talking about from, you know, the last 70 years.
And that in and of itself, what it's become, I guess, modern filmmakers, TV people have not figured out a way to make that expressive enough to warrant enough interest in it. Is that fair?
Last year's troubles are more inviting than the troubles we have today. They just look better.
Well, that's well said. Yes, absolutely. Any final thoughts on Gangsters? Is there any movie that we haven't mentioned, or anything you want to like shout out real quick that people should check out as far as you know, mobster movies or TV series or anything like that? We'll start with you, ToniAnn.
I am sad that we didn't get to talk about Reservoir Dogs and The Departed, because those are some really, really, really great films. And I'm also sad that I didn't think about more, like there's a lot of those police procedural shows where they always have like somebody goes into deep cover in the mob or something. Like they always have that couple arc episode. And I most recently watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine again, and they had a really great arc where one of the main characters goes undercover in the mob. And if you haven't watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine, they do a lot of really great stuff. And
I think one of the Law and Orders is now organized crime.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Because that's New York for you.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Nick? I will happily second ToniAnn's recommendation of American Gangster that she brought up. Also, that's the first in line of a bunch of blaxploitation gangster movies from the 70s. Black Caesar, Black Godfather. The Bumpy that's mentioned at the beginning of American Gangster is pretty much the guy that is giving Shaft a hard time in the movie Shaft, and much more so in Shaft's big score, its sequel. If you care to check out any blaxploitation things, there's plenty of gangsters there. And also go back in time and watch some film noir. It's good for you, kids. You get to see Kirk Douglas and Raymond Burr as heavies rather than heroes.
It's true. Mike, any from you?
I love what everyone's been talking about. This is, everything I've seen, everything that I just love talking about and watching. One we didn't bring up was a show from 1986. It was called Crime Story. And it actually featured Dennis Ferreira in the lead. And it took place in the 1960s.
Is that the one that Jerry Lewis was in?
I think he was in an episode. No.
Okay,
that's something
there was
different.
One where he played a gangster, I think.
My problem, I think, Crime Story. I think Jackie Chan, because I'm thinking Police Story.
Oh, right,
but
yeah.
Dennis Farina, the guy who used to be a cop.
Yeah.
Yep.
And who comes across so well as a mobster, especially in Get Shorty.
Oh, exactly. Get Shorty is another one we didn't even mention.
A great comedy version of the mob.
Yes. But Crime Story was awesome because it was in the early 1960s and it only lasted one season. And it was so fun because it was over the top in a lot of ways, but it was a great crime drama. It was this team of police officers that were set to a task force to go take on the mob. And it was really awesome.
Very cool.
So I would recommend it. And you could see it on Peacock or right now and everything for free.
And speaking of things you can see for free, I would just recommend tune in to Turner Classic Movies this month because they are celebrating 100 years of Warner Brothers. Every movie that they're showing this month is a Warner Brothers movie, and they are devoting a lot of time to gangster movies: Public Enemy, White Heat, Angels with Dirty Faces, Little Caesar, The Petrified Forest, Roaring Twenties. These are movies that are classic. And they hold up. The performances by Cagney, Robinson, Bogart, et cetera, are just they're iconic. And it's always fun to see what those find. TCM is showing them all, like I said. They're also, TCM has a channel, I think, on HBO Max, so you can dial them up that way, or I think Xfinity has them as available as well. So yeah, go back to the beginning, check them all out.
And if you want free for old movies, for all sorts of things, check out Canopy with a K and Hoopla. You will probably be able to get them with a card from your local public library, streamed straight to your TV or preferred method of viewing.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Nick. Okay, well, thanks for hanging out and talking about Gangsters, you dirty rats. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back to close the show.
Okay, YouTube folks, this is our extra spot. It's interesting, we talked about the mob, we talked about, gangsters and such. To you guys, what is your worst interpretation of the gangsters or a mobster?
Like worst in terms of boring, or worst in terms of like, oh, that's offensive.
Whichever you'd like. This is up to you guys.
I have a list.
Yeah. Go for it, Nick.
Okay, first of all, thankfully the movies we brought up. Training Day, because the screenwriter claimed he knew Los Angeles and things that are absolutely impossible in Los Angeles happen. Also, I think Denzel's character would have been better had Denzel Washington's character been more morally vague rather than King Kong's got nothing on me. No, that's tired and old. Scarface, because it's as ethnically offensive as any lazy Italian American mobster stereotype that was ever on. Sure. And I'm frankly not crazy about Gangster Squad, despite the high gloss. It's just kind of ridiculous in a lot of ways. So those are my three gangster movies that don't quite make the grade as far as I'm concerned.
Awesome.
They need to sleep with the fishes.
Gotcha. ToniAnn?
As much as I hate to say it, I think Smokin' Aces. I don't know, because it's got Ryan Reynolds in it, so you're like, oh, but it was not great. I think they really tried to do a lot of things that just didn't work. And so I had almost forgotten it existed till I was like, oh, what are some gangster mobster movies that I watched or ones that had some organized crime in it? And I was like, oh yeah, that was not great.
No, I totally understand that completely. Mikey, what about you?
I'm trying to think of one that really didn't work for me. And I must say I'm not actually, okay, I'm gonna call out this was disappointing to me because usually I like his work and it was a great subject matter, but the movie just was dull as dishwater, and that was Live by Night by Ben Affleck, who starred and directed in it, about a Boston gangster, and it should have been right up my alley. It's very cool and interesting, but yeah, it was just kind of dull. Ben just didn't really know what to do with it, I think. So
no, totally understand.
There's a classic film noir with that title. That's what I think when I hear that. So I don't know that that's the same thing, but yeah.
No, it's not the same movie.
No, I mean the same plot.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay, because like for me, I always like it still puts hackles on the back of my neck was like Analyze This with Billy Crystal. And
okay.
It's just, for me, it's like De Niro like parroting himself, and it's like, I know it's supposed to be in a lot of ways, but it also tries to take itself seriously. And I'm not a huge Billy Crystal fan anyway, but except for when he's storming a castle, but that's a whole different, but
it's a different genre.
Exactly. But him and De Niro, it didn't work for me. And it just was like, it felt like they were forcing every stereotype down your throat as they went on it and everything. And it just kept on going and going and going. And I was just like, no, this doesn't work. And then they made a sequel. So it was
Yes,
even
analyze
worse.
that.
Yeah, I know. So for me, it was just like, no. So I don't know. It's interesting though, because there's tons of tales still to be told and everything. And I just, I want to see done quality wise, not,
I would, if you're opening that can of worms,
Hmm.
I'll start off with, I would love to see a more factually hewn story about Meyer Lansky in Cuba. Because Godfather 2 has been such a huge influence that people think Meyer Lansky was an old man about to die, when in fact he was just in his mid-50s when that whole Cuba thing went down. The story of Meyer Lansky in Cuba would make as more or less it happened, would make a great movie.
No, I could see that. I could totally see that. Another one that also was supposed to be, a mob hitman, like on the run type thing, was The Whole 10 Yards.
Yes, yeah, the whole 9 yards and then the whole 10 yards.
Right.
I don't think I know this.
Yeah, so it was Matthew Perry, I think, and
Matthew Perry and Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis, yes.
Yes.
So
Okay.
it's guy running away from the mob, and the other person is just the neighbor, and then they get caught up in things. I haven't watched it in forever, but those were a lot of fun, if I recall correctly.
I thank you for telling me this. This is something I am completely unaware of.
And then there was a movie with Steve Martin where he was playing a gangster who was supposed to be undercover, like in witness protection. And
that's not Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, is it?
No.
Okay.
This is the one. It has Rick Moranis in it.
Mm.
And hold on, if there was only an internet out there for us to
right. Yeah. So
well, when we're talking about not so famous gangsters, you can't forget Tom Hanks in Road to Perdition.
Oh yeah.
Oh God.
Yes. Yeah. That
My Blue Heaven.
That is
My
quite
Blue
good.
Heaven.
My Blue. Oh, that's a musical, isn't it? No, I think of Pennies from Heaven.
No, that's Pennies from Heaven.
Yeah,
that's a
Pennies
musical.
From Heaven. Okay. Yeah. Although I will say, people kept talking about how nasty Tom Hanks was in Road to Perdition. I think he was a lot nastier in Cloud Atlas. But Road to Perdition, it's a good film.
It's a good film.
Mm-hmm. So, all right. So you two people, this is why you guys stick with us. You get some really bad conversations or good conversations in some ways. So it's a good thing. So I think it's time to close up the show. And that's going to wrap up another episode of the Earth Station One podcast. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Nick, thank you as always for being back with us. Anything you need to promote? Anything you want to promote?
I will be hosting a couple panels at NorwestCon this coming week in Seattle. A panel on what the normal people actually ate in history. One I'm actually moderating on My Favorite Martian about aliens and our favorite aliens, and a couple other things having to do with movies and stuff like that. So yes, I will be at NorwestCon. Our guest of honor is P. Jelly Clark, who is a great author of gaslight fiction taking place in an alternate Egypt.
Nice.
One of my favorite series. So that's my big promo.
Very awesome. Very cool. And ToniAnn, thank you so much. You made it through your first episode with us.
I know. It was a fun time. I've done a couple of quarantine panels with the classics track over at Dragon Con. And so I'm familiar with the online style, but this is definitely definitely always a good time. I'm happy to bring my very small bit of knowledge. I've been sort of avoiding spoilers for the last 40 to 60 years. There's a lot of things. I have big gaps in my my pop culture knowledge. So I haven't started watching Star Trek until 2020.
Oh, wow.
And so
the original series,
all of it. I had never
Okay.
watched any of it. So in January of 2020, I started with the original series. I've currently been stuck in Enterprise for the last few months because, you know, everything that's going on in Enterprise is awful. I apologize if you like it. But my goal is to watch all of it and get to all the new stuff. And I've been blogging about that. So if you want to read my ridiculous writings, especially all of my Enterprise episodes, I rate and they all have to do with Porthos. So I'll be like, this episode got 7 treats for Porthos, or Porthos sat in timeout for 3 minutes because this episode was so terrible. So I'm over at thegeekydevil.com.
Awesome.
He is the best character.
Yeah, he's him and Phlox. When the doctor and the dog are your 2 favorite characters, there's a problem with the series.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. And Mr. Mike, we've made it through another one.
We did, and as always, it's my pleasure.
Anything you want to shout out about, sir?
I do. I want to give a shout out to a Kickstarter project that I think is pretty exciting. The Mike Mignola, as we all know, comic creator of Hellboy, as among many other things, he has actually lended his talents to a adaptation of, or an illustrated version, I should say, of the original classic text Pinocchio. And he's gotten together with Lemony Snicket, and they've created this like really, really beautiful volume of the original Pinocchio stories, and with a lot of extras. I mean, this thing is gorgeous. And you know, if you've only seen the Disney version or you've only seen the new Netflix movie, you really haven't seen the real Pinocchio. So this is really timely, and it's very cool. It's got some really cool people behind it. It's already met its goal, so it's going to be done. But if you want to be part of this, if you want to make sure you reserve your copy of it, I would definitely take advantage of it. The Kickstarter ends on the 20th of April. So yeah, check it out. We'll have a link in the show notes. This thing is like, this thing looks amazing.
That's pretty awesome. You know, and his artwork is just, you know, the work he does is just awesome and everything. I'm looking forward to seeing that project.
Sorry, not a direct tie-in, although I guess maybe Pinocchio met up with the mob at some point. I don't know. Yeah.
The donkey mob. No. Yeah, the whale was the big heavy in it. So.
I'm going to tell you the truth because I can't do anything else.
Exactly. This is not going to be pretty for you. See, my nose didn't grow, so it's perfect. All right, my shout out real quick. Another series that Judy and I had been watching. You know, seems like half the time I'm talking about TV series that I recommend. Judy and I just got done watching the first season of the reboot of Quantum Leap, and Peacock has done an amazing job with the series. As of this recording, the season finale for season 1 has just aired, and dude, it's going to blow you away. And all I want to say is, oh boy. So, yeah, it's pretty awesome. If you're a fan of the original Quantum Leap, it is a continuation of the story. It's not a reboot, and that is a true plus for it. And they use it for its advantage. And it's a new leaper. It's a great story. If you hadn't seen the original Quantum Leap, you could still love the show and everything. It's definitely worth checking out, and it's just fun, and it's a good series, and it's on Peacock for free if you get a chance. So is the original Quantum Leap. So if you want to catch up with that also, you know, my wife has not seen the original series, and so you know, we started watching the original also, and she's loving the interaction between Sam and Al. So it's pretty cool and everything. So definitely check that out. Quantum Leap on Peacock. All right, folks, that is going to be it for tonight. Want to thank everyone for being here. It has been a barrel of fun, and we didn't lose anybody, so it was good. It was always good with that. It's easier when, you don't have to forget about it, or bada bing, bada boom, that type of thing. So it's pretty cool. Forget about it, But as always, thanks for listening to Earth Station One. Remember, we couldn't do this without you. If you want to support us, please check out our Tee-Public store and get some really cool ESO Network swag, including the new Wonder Warrior t-shirt that we have, where you can have a Wonder Warrior mug, or you can have a Wonder Warrior button or such, or even a sticker. It's pretty cool what you can get. And you know what? All the money we make from those t-shirts is going to charity in honor of Darren. So please check it out. We would really appreciate it. Also, remember, if you want to listen to our show before the rest of the world, why not join the ESO Network Patreon? For as little as $1 a month, you could help support us here at the Earth Station One podcast. Check out the ESO Network Patreon at patreon.com. We want to hear from you sometime, so please write us anytime at feedback@earthstation1.com. Remember, you could also find Earth Station One wherever fine podcasts are found. Now you could also find Earth Station One in video format up on YouTube, and we're even now a YouTube podcast. So please check us out up there, and tell all your friends about us. And as we always like to say, like and subscribe. We would really appreciate that. On behalf of myself, Mr. Mike Faber, of course, Mr. Mike Gordon, Ms. ToniAnn Marini, and of course, Mr. Nick Fraser. Thank you always for joining us, everybody. We do appreciate you guys for listening and hearing us ramble for quite a bit. It's always fun talking to you guys. We'll see you next time here on Earth Station One. Peace, and we are done.